Okay, here we are. On to part 4. It's going to be tone and color, but before that, I need to make some minor adjustments to the drawing. I'm going to separate the back of his armor, the black back plate from his torso. Going to add some shadows in there. Oh, and I need to adjust his head. I do this a lot, actually. I tend to put the head a little bit too forward. It looks a little awkward. So I'm going to pull the head back a little bit, select it, and just move it back. And you can do as much refining as you would like. You know, you can make it photorealistic. That's all it really is, just a matter of going in and refining, adding more detail, and fixing things. Maybe sometimes you take out detail, but it's a matter of just working and working. How much work do you want to put into it? Going in, adding some little shadows underneath, a little hatching, putting in pretty quickly. And it looks like that's enough for now. So now I'm going to use the magic wand and make some selections. So first of all, I want to merge those layers of drawings I've had. So I had different things on different layers. Now I'm going to select outside the figure. And then you want to select also any additional shapes inside the figure. You'll notice I forgot the shape in his hand, which I'll have to deal with later. But it's not the end of the world. Just make that selection. Make a new layer. And then you want to reverse the selection so it selects inside the figure. And then add a layer mask. And I like to duplicate that layer so I have an extra copy of it. Switch it to multiply mode. Pick a bigger brush. It's okay to take your time figuring that out. And then start putting in a gray because I'm putting in a mid-tone. Switch from monochrome to grayscale for that level. And what I do is I just fill the whole layer. Since I have the layer mask, it'll just turn the figure gray. And here I'm adjusting the color. It was a little bit too dark before. I want to make it a little bit lighter. Because he's wearing armor pretty much over his entire body. So I might as well make the whole thing gray. So what I'm going to do now is just draw in white for the face area. That's pretty much the only part of the figure that's not in armor. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing with white color on the same layer that I had the gray. There's definitely different ways you could do this. You can work on the layer mask, erase parts of the layer mask or add to the layer mask, or just draw on the layer itself, which I'm doing. Now I'll go in here and I noticed that section inside the hand that I forgot to mask out. And I'm trying to fill it and it's not working. And what I really need to do is just erase it. So I select that layer mask layer and just erase, delete it, and there we go. So now I have a nice mask. And the mask is nice, it helps you stay within the lines. You don't have to worry about drawing outside the figure. or coloring outside the figure. And it's really nice because, I filled that whole shape with just one button press or a couple of button presses. So it saves you a lot of time using layer masks. That's another interesting thing too about your process is, for example, I really like manga, and I like black and white comics too. So I tend to do a lot of work in black and white and gray, like manga. And I'm also using Clip Studio, which is designed for making comics and manga. If you're in Photoshop, these sort of processes are not as easy to do. I mean, you can still do it, but this program is definitely designed to work in this method. So your materials really matter. They don't matter as much as you as an artist, but they will shape how your work comes out. Now here I'm putting in some highlights on this armor, some light reflections. I feel like it gives it a lot of life. And imagining a light that's coming from the front, maybe a little bit above, a little bit to the left. Lighting's really a whole nother topic in itself. But you want to imagine that this is a real person and it has some sort of lighting. And this is more like a studio sort of setting actually. This is like you have this knight, this warrior in your studio and you're taking a photograph and you have a photographic lighting set up. Sometimes you may want to use natural lighting. Been watching a lot of Martin Scorsese and reading a lot about George Lucas, and it's really interesting that their whole approach to lighting and how it sort of revolutionized Hollywood. Before then they had motion pictures that were made in studios and closed lots, and they used studio lighting, artificial lighting, and so it had like a very different quality. And then you have this sort of these new wave directors, and they start using natural lighting, and you have these different shadows, and it gives it a whole different character. So it's something to think about when you're doing these drawings. You're not only drawing, creating form, but you're also creating lighting. You're like the lighting director and the cinematographer and the character designer all in the same sort of setting. Or maybe more like a photographer. You're like a designer and a photographer. Photographers think a lot about lighting, what kind of lights, where you're placing them, where the shadows are going to be. So if I were to really analyze the lighting in this, it would be, there's a lot of ambient lighting, there's not a lot of heavy shadows. There are shadows underneath, so there's, lighting from above. And then there's these highlights on the kind of on the front of the figure. So there's some kind of light coming from the front also. So, one of the other things to think about, in addition to the figure and the form and the tone, is the lighting. So now I'm getting into color. So I need to make a color layer. I'm using one of those copies of the layer mask I made before. I'm really into non-natural colors for right now. So I don't really feel tied to having to make this realistic. Because I think that's can be a little bit less creative, at least for me. This isn't the 15 or 1600s. We're living in, the year 2019, and our tastes in colors have changed. Our color palettes have changed. And so I want to reflect a contemporary sensibility, even in this sort of like fantasy medieval character. For some people, they're really into realism, which is totally fine. You can find reference, find out what sort of colors that armor was back in the day. Even then, you'll find a lot of variation in creativity. But so I have this sort of like purplish color, and I'm going into his skin now on the same layer as his armor. And unfortunately, the oil paint won't work on top of whatever color I had before, so I'm gonna go back to the pen tool and pick a bigger brush. And these are all flat colors. If you want, you could go in and model it, um, add different colors and add grays and different tones. But I'm just gonna keep it flat. I like this light blue. And just to make things even quicker, go ahead and use the paintbrush or the paint bucket tool. And since we did all that work closing in the shapes, paint bucket doesn't go all over the place and saves us a little time. And colors are another thing that are a reflection of your personality. What kind of colors are you into? And what does that say about you? What does it say about what you're into? And I know it's a whole nother topic. It'd be nice to get a psychologist in here to analyze it. For me, I just try to make colors that I feel contemporary. I feel kind of new. Going in and turning the sword gray because it should be, like metal, and not necessarily a colored metal. I guess you could have colored metal, but that also gives a little bit of distinction from his armor. Color, it's a whole another topic right there. I'm a big fan of Andy Warhol. I feel like he had a really great, amazing sense of color. And that's me bringing in various influences into my character design work. And it's cool. You should have different influences. It'll make your characters more interesting and more creative. And you'll have more fun too. And you'll be happier with it because you'll be incorporating your whole self into your artwork.